Hello everyone, Ugodre here, and this is Talknomics, the podcast where we delve into the business, economics, and finance world from a Nigerian perspective. And on this show, we interview the best minds in the Nigerian economy, business leaders, economic experts, special advisors, anyone who has a key stake in the Nigerian economy. And we break it all down here. This is not where you talk for just 5 or 10 minutes. This gives a lot of our expertise or experts here the time to delve into the Nigerian economy and break down some of those things that are burning in our minds. And today, I have none other than a very special guest, someone I've always also admired, particularly for a lot of the work that he's doing to push private businesses in Nigeria. You do see him a lot on TV as well, and I'm sure you read a lot of his comments in several articles. He's been quoted widely across articles from the media, both locally and internationally. So is there someone who really understands the pulse of Nigerian businesses, someone who can speak from the point of view of Nigerians? He's none other than Dr. Muda Yusuf. Did I say Muda Yusuf?
Yes,
correct. Yes. How are you, sir?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good to see you, sir.
Yes.
I think last time we probably were together was virtual. So this is seeing you physically.
And I must appreciate what Nairametrics has been doing.
Thank you very much, sir.
The quality of economic discourse and all of that. At least we have
elevated it.
Yes, elevated it.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir. That has always been, our mission here. Basically to create wealth through information. You've also been doing a lot of very good work, particularly with your founding of the Center for Promotion for Private Enterprise. Just curious to know about how that came about. Anyways, how did you?
I was in the Lagos Chamber of Commerce for about 25 years.
Yes, you were.
And 10 years out of that, or more, slightly more, I was the DG. So I've always operated in this policy advocacy space, feeling the pulse of businesses, intervention in the advocacy area, policy, regulations, and all of those things that impact private sector performance. So it was only natural when I left the NCC. I said, what else can I do? Let me just continue on this path.
On that journey.
So that is.
It must have been very fulfilling for you.
No, it has
challenging
been,
as well.
No, it has been fulfilling. Yeah. Well, it has also been challenging. But when you do things that you enjoy doing, you don't even feel that
you just go on with the
exactly
with the tide. Fantastic. I like to start this show with your economic ideology. You're an economist, anyway. So we do know that we're in a global economy where is either you're capitalist or you're socialist or you're center of left or center of right. I always like to start with that so that that also helps a lot of our listeners understand your perspective and your ideologies, particularly when it comes to running an economy. So how would you describe where you sit? Are you
I think it is better to be at the center.
Okay.
And it's also always better to calibrate policies to suit your peculiarities.
Yes.
Because no two economies are exactly the same. And when you are managing a developing economy, there are a lot of models that you need to tweak. It's not always the best. When you pick either IMF models or World Bank models and you implant it almost hook, line, and sinker within your system. Especially when you are grappling with issues of development, issues of poverty, equality, all those issues, that impact on the social and economic lives of the people. So understanding the peculiarities is very important. There are objectives that the markets can deliver. There are objectives that also you need to calibrate policies to be able to deliver, particularly when it comes to social objectives and economic objectives. Because what I do know is that when we talk about markets, market is also largely about profit. You know?
Correct.
So when you leave your economy too much to the market, capital will gravitate only to areas where profits or money can be made. And that may create a lot of challenges because there are economic objectives to be delivered within the framework of general economic governance. There are social objectives to be delivered. Market cannot deliver social objectives because there is no much money to be made.
I mean, but people always say there's trickle-down economics, so it will trickle down at least to a large extent.
No. It may trickle down, but, you know, it needs to be properly directed, you know? Because, I mean, take, for instance, you are talking about, say, Medicare for the poor. If you are an investor in the healthcare sector, how much money can you make from providing
to the poor
medical facilities to the poor? You can't make much money. The same thing with education. Education is critical and from a social and economic objective.
Yeah.
But if you have people, a majority of them exist in the country, where the parents cannot afford to pay any tangible amount in terms of school fees.
Yeah.
As an investor in education, you cannot, unless you are a social entrepreneur. But if you are there for business, in line with market principle, you cannot be investing and expect the children of the poor to patronize because they cannot pay.
Yeah.
You know. So yes, there may be trickle-down effect, but there's also, we need to define the limits of how far the market can go. And that is why I'm very particular about economic system that recognizes market failure. Because government intervention is to correct market failures. So where market fails, government needs to step in. So that you don't run an economy that is leaving too many people behind. Which is what some elements of, you know, these current reforms, you know, tend to do if there is too much focus on, you know, allowing the market to drive some processes. So it is extremely important to balance those objectives, economic objectives, social objectives, and profit objectives. You know, those things are very critical. So those are the things that will shape whatever ideology
that you want to gravitate towards.
Yes.
Fantastic. I think we're going to come to that later because I would want us to, at some point on this episode, discuss, you know, the difference in approach when it comes to economic ideology from a China and a US perspective. Because I think they both pursue a little bit of a different economic ideology, and at the same time, there are a lot of similarities, but we'll get there in a bit. So let's just come back to Nigeria now and let's talk about reforms. We've seen a lot of reforms in the last 2 years, the sort of reforms that one would obviously classify as market-driven reforms compared to the Buhari administration that was a bit more social in terms of their reforms. And one of the top reforms that you would want to always remember this government for is forex reforms. And we've heard you speak a lot about this, you know, on several programs. But just on this platform, at least, there's a lot of time for you to maybe break down your own perspective. What do you think about this current FX reforms, and you know what the experience has been for you know manufacturers? Is this reforms any better than what we had before, or do you think that you know maybe perhaps may have been implemented differently, or do you just think this reform is good, just takes time?
No, I believe the current forex reform is good.
Okay,
but like many other reforms or policies, there is no reform that is perfect. There is no policy that is perfect. And it is always good to recognize the gaps in any policy, you know, and respond appropriately, again, by way of government intervention. Now, under the Emefiele regime, there was this unorthodox philosophy of that regime, particularly Emefiele was always talking about the unorthodox, you know, monetary policy. You know, that regime was characterized by a lot of transparency issues, you know, a lot of corruption, you know, because it was essentially an administrative allocation framework of foreign exchange. You know, you needed all manner of contacts. And you know what it is when you talk about contacts in this economy. You know, a lot of things go into it before you can get, whether it is forex allocation, whether it's even intervention funds, you know. Because those things were, there was a lot of discretionary powers around them. So it became, you know, inequitable. It was riddled with all manner of issues, you know. And it got to a point that our international trade system became almost endangered because our letters of credit were no longer being honored at a point by many of our correspondent banks. Because you open a letter of credit, the banks cannot, you know, fund it. So it became a major issue. So much so that the international trading system for us was almost collapsing as a result of that model
that they had.
That we had. So from that point of view, I really support the whole idea of allowing the market to play a much bigger role in the forex allocation.
Okay.
Because the market system was a lot more transparent, you know, and it also allowed for better inflows of foreign exchange. Because under the Emefiele regime, you know, it was so rigid. They will tell you that exchange rate is 450. If you are bringing imports into this economy, it has to be at 450. So that created a very large underground economy as far as forex was concerned.
Because of the arbitrage that was going on.
Because of the arbitrage. Yeah. Then there was also the challenge that exporters were facing. If they export, if you want to repatriate the export proceeds, they have to convert it at 450. Meanwhile, the open market was 750. So because of that, many exporters were not declaring their export proceeds. Some of them were taking their consignments to Benin Republic, to Ghana, because of it was a major distortion in the system. So this system at least has liberalized the inflows. And if you look at the data, net inflows have been positive for a very long time. And it has been improving.
At least for the last 12 to 18 months.
Yes, it has been improving significantly. So this new policy regime has actually corrected those distortions. So to that extent, I think it's a very good and welcome policy transition that needed to happen in order to stabilize and clean up the whole and reset the way we manage our foreign exchange environment. But the point again to make is that at the beginning, the position of the central bank, in my view, was that it was going to be completely floated and that there was no indication that there was going to be periodic intervention. That's willing buyer, willing seller. And that came with a lot of volatility. You know, the volatility was so bad that businesses could not even take decision. You know, a lot of uncertainty around it. But it came to a point where the CBN, I think, now recognized the fact that that volatility was not sustainable and that there was a need for regular interventions. Of course, the intervention will be subject to their capacity to intervene. So that intervention has helped to bring some stability, you know, to the foreign exchange market. Again, that speaks to the fact that you cannot afford to leave the system completely to the market. There has to be some framework to ensure some moderation in the volatility, which the CBN has been doing. So I think we are getting it right as far as the foreign exchange environment is concerned. Although I've heard some manufacturers saying that there has to be preferential allocation to foreign exchange to malware. I don't think that can work in this environment. So this market system with this model of periodic intervention, I think it's a good thing, and I think it has been working well for us.
Okay, so I mean, I hear you when you say, you know, so basically there can be allocations to, you know, different sectors of the economy like you had under the Emefiele regime. So that doesn't work.
It's not
in this sort of environment that we have.
You know, there are some institutional framework that you need to support that kind of regime. We don't have that.
Which is almost like a subsidy, isn't it?
No, of course, it's a form of subsidy. And subsidy is not bad anyway, but not subsidy in that sense. Yes, yes.
Okay, so why then do manufacturers, still complain about FX? Or are manufacturers now able to source FX better now compared to the way it was maybe under Emefiele or any other?
I believe they are able to source better now.
Is this based on your own feel, or have you had any feedback from manufacturers?
No, the feedback I got, at least from them, I think most of them are able to get it better now.
Okay. So where do they usually get it from? Do they buy it from because CBN has this platform now?
No, it's the CBN platform.
Okay.
It's the CBN platform that they buy these things from.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the CBN platform. The only complaint, I think, is about cost. The exchange rate
itself.
And unfortunately, because we have a manufacturing sector that is highly import dependent, so the exchange rate situation, creates a lot of problem for them, particularly for raw materials, and that is also some of the challenges that we have in this economy when we look at the structure of our industries, It's something that we also need to worry about going forward, because it is also not good for the industrial sector to be too import dependent. It makes the sector highly, highly vulnerable. It affects their competitiveness and so on. So, but generally, the complaints are far, far less now. Access is better, it's more transparent, and the level of corruption that we used to have in those under the previous regime no longer existed. Under the previous regime again, you want an allocation of 100,000, maybe they give you $10,000. So you begin to bid incrementally until you're able
to accumulate it.
Yes, and you can be there
for months.
Yeah, months or even years sometimes. Meanwhile, you have tied down.
And then you probably have a competitor who has better connects.
Exactly.
And gets it before you, and then underprices you.
Exactly. So all those, the fact that we have been able to do away with all those issues, I think, it's a major achievement,
All right, great. So, still on this subject, we've, at least this is based on Nairametrics survey, we kind of noticed that a lot of Nigerians seem to go for made in Nigeria goods these days compared to imported ones. We don't know if this is representative of the entire in the country, but just a little bit of survey that we've done and some feelers that we've gotten from some Nigerians. So is that how manufacturers feel? Do you think that this Forex policy has perhaps maybe aided local manufacturing more than foreign in terms of how they're able to compete? Is there any sort of maybe data or information that you're getting in that direction?
Well, I think we can look at it from the point of view of even basic economic principles. Now the exchange rate has witnessed major significant depreciation. The cost of imports have gone up. So if you have local alternatives, it's likely to be cheaper, particularly where the local content of that production is high. It's likely to be much more competitive compared to the imports. So the exchange rate reform, particularly the liberalization of the market, has also changed the behavior, consumer preferences in favor of what is produced locally, because it is now a lot more cheaper. Especially, again, I must emphasize, where the production system is not also too dependent on imports.
Oh, I see.
So there's a competitive advantage for those who are producing locally now. And the competitive advantage is not limited to domestic markets. There's also better advantage now, even for the export market. Yes. A lot. That is why many of our manufacturers have reported an increase in export, especially to neighboring countries. Because, in the literature, economic literature, weak currency incentivizes exports.
Yeah.
So that is also manifesting here. So a lot of activities, in the non-oil export as a result of the foreign exchange reform. So it is not something that we speak about often, but it's one of the major benefits.
But doctor, a lot of Nigerians complain though. They say, look, they hear a lot of economists come out and say, look, some of these FX policies are working, they're good. But they say, well, things are just so expensive now, and a lot of them blame the exchange rate for that. How could we go from maybe 700 to 15, 16? That has now impacted prices of goods and services. Transportation costs has gone up. Groceries, cost of groceries have also gone up. Education has gone up. So how is this of benefit to Nigerians, this FX reforms?
No, the point is that normally with this kind of transition, you should expect that kind of shock. Because you are
coming... Is there a timeline to this shock? Is it going to happen in 1 year, 2 years from your experience?
Well, it will take some time. It will take some time. But the point to make is that we are coming from a foreign exchange regime first that was heavily subsidized. And secondly, that was also not sustainable. I just told you what the situation was getting. Before. I mean, we were on the brink before all of this started. There's no way you could build reserves. In fact, you could see a lot of forward this, forward that, order within the forex market, within the crude oil space, that the previous administration was just desperately sourcing forex to be able to fill those gaps. So those things were not sustainable. So we need to come to the reality that we have to operate a system that is sustainable. Secondly, we also need that kind of structural shift in the economy, because whether we like it or not, the forex reform has brought about also some kind of structural reform, to move, attention away or focus away from too much of import dependence. Unfortunately, we don't have the supportive either infrastructure or some core industry to support that shift. But that is the direction that things are going now. And if you look at businesses that are purely local, they are generally more competitive than businesses that are heavily import dependent. So that is where I think this structural change is taking us.
So you think
and I've had some people who are in the agri value chain. Yes, it is not good for food and all of that to be expensive. But I have been getting reports of some people who are in that chain who are making good money now.
So are you suggesting that, based on these FX reforms, probably better to be a local manufacturer than to be someone who is into the business of importing to sell?
Of course. I mean, go and check the cargo throughput at the port. It has declined significantly. It has declined. Some of the revenue that have been posted by customs and so on are largely as a result of the depreciation in the exchange. If you look at the cargo throughput, and what I mean by cargo throughput is the flow of cargo.
Flow of cargos into that. That's the volume of imports.
It has declined significantly. And what that is telling us is that there is a greater incentive to be inward looking. And I'll also give you an example. Some of the institutions to which many of our elites used to send their children abroad to, secondary schools and all of that, some of those institutions are now coming down to Nigeria to set up. Yes, because the demand for this high-end, top-end education is very high. Now, the elites, not many of them can afford to send those children abroad anymore. So because the local demand has increased, more of those top-end schools are emerging. I don't know whether you have noticed it.
I know, but I've always wondered that business model, whether it works, because you always think that the reason why most elites want to send their wards abroad is not just for the education, but for the network effect and the fact that perhaps that could give them an advantage with citizenship.
No, I think it's also, again, about quality. Quality of education. When you have the means, you want to give the best to your children, because most of these elites already have the network anyway. So I don't think networking is actually their problem. But because of the demand that this forex regime has created, some of those institutions have been coming here, particularly in Lagos and in Abuja. They now come here to set up quality schools. The same thing is happening with hospitals. Top-end, high-end hospitals are now emerging now. Private sector, both in Lagos and in Abuja. Some of them foreign. Some of our citizens that are abroad are coming back home because the demand for that is increasing. Yes. So really, there is a lot of benefits that this reform has brought about in terms of refocusing our attention to be more inward looking. That is essential. But what needs to now happen is that for those who are inward looking, what kind of support are we giving them to make it easy?
Which is my next, line of questions now, because we've also heard a lot of manufacturers groan over, the increase in energy prices, whether it's because of subsidy removal or adjustments in electricity prices, which again is also part of these reforms that we're talking about. But you've seen them complain that has essentially increased cost of production. So is there any difference in the benefit from, that you're getting from forex reforms that you're not getting from energy reforms?
No, there's a difference. Now, energy is a development issue. It's not just a business issue. It's a development issue. And when you are dealing with issues around development, it's both even development issue, it's also a social issue. And when you are dealing with those kind of issues, there has to be a mix of public investment and private investment. That is what can work. Because when you talk about industries, there is no way we can have any breakthrough in manufacturing if we don't have the right kind of energy infrastructure. It will be extremely, extremely difficult. That is why if you look at our export, non-oil exports, for instance, manufacturing exports.
Titans, huh?
Yes. It's peanuts, nothing much. The only element of manufacturing exports you see are maybe some exports to neighboring countries. And that has been increasing now because the CFA to the Naira, the CFA has appreciated significantly. So that is why there's a lot of outflow of our products, even agricultural products.
Because we did notice that Nigeria's export to Africa is now on the highest.
It has gone up. Even our food products. Part of the reason we are having food crisis is because it is cheaper and it's more profitable for those who are merchants in the food business to take the food out.
Oh, so you mean that? So a lot of the food inflation pressures we're getting is also because you're seeing a lot of exports out. So a lot of agro companies are probably better off exporting.
They are better off exporting. Because, the CFA has appreciated significantly against CFA in those days used to be, 1 Naira to 3 CFA or so. It's the other way around now. So it has encouraged a lot of outflows. So that is why there has been an increase in our non-oil exports, at least to African countries and all of that, in addition to some transshipment. Some of these African countries are also landlocked countries. So some of the things that we import here, like all these motorcycles, spare parts, and so on, a lot of that also go out, although they go out informally. So these things are not even properly recorded. So when we talk about trade within the sub-region and in Africa, the official figures don't reflect the reality of what goes on. So
still on this energy crisis, how do you think, from your own experience, what are manufacturers doing? Are they perhaps maybe self-generating now, whether it's power or whether it's gas and diesel, or are they gravitating more towards renewable?
Most of them are self-generating. Most of them, and it's extremely very, very difficult. And it's not only manufacturers. When I was walking to your premises,
self-generating.
Your generator was working.
And we're on band A, by the way.
And you're on band A, And each time I see a generator working, consuming diesel, it's like burning money.
Yeah.
Because it's very expensive.
Yeah, it is.
How can you break even with that? So it's not just manufacturing.
Isn't this meant to also help the people that are in renewables? I mean, because now that energy cost has gone up, particularly diesel, fuel, power, is there any benefit that this provides for this renewable sector that used to be quite pricey, at some point? But now you're seeing, I mean, if you go around Lagos now, especially even in Abuja, you see a lot of rooftops with solar panels.
Solar panels.
On. So is this a boost to them?
It is. It's a major, major boost to them. But the thing about renewable is that you can't use renewable in most cases to power heavy duty equipment. That is the only disadvantage. But for household and some office use, renewable is the way to go. And it's gaining a lot of traction. And that is why we should also continue to advocate that as much as possible, the government should make it even much more easier for the citizens and corporates to get on board this renewable. Yes, there have been some exemption on solar panels in terms of tariff, but we should also do something with the batteries. Import duty on the batteries are still high.
Yeah.
By the time you add the duty with the VAT, with the ECOWAS level, it's getting close to 30%. So if we are in a country where we have issue with public electricity, we should also create that window for individuals and corporates who want to migrate to this renewable, to do so very, very seamlessly. So it's a major policy thing that needs to happen. Because right now the cost of inverters, the cost of batteries are extremely very high.
But I thought the government is saying, the reason why they are doing this is because they're trying to encourage local manufacturers of these things. Recently, they said they banned, they're planning to ban importation of solar panel in Nigeria so that you can allow local manufacturers.
No. That's another Trump model
that we shouldn't be pursuing, right?
We should not pursue that. If you want to go that route, you must have built some capacity. If you say today now that you want to buy the importation of cement, nobody will blink. If you say today you want to buy the importation of fuel, nobody will blink.
Because we have the refinery.
We have capacity. But you don't start talking about when you don't have any capacity. What capacity do you have for the production of solar panels? So those things, I think they are not the kind of thing you should even be saying. As a minister, it was the Minister of Science and Tech that made that pronouncement. I think when some manufacturers, went to him or maybe was commissioning something and all of that. Yeah, it is good. But at this stage, what is needed is to support those manufacturing people. Ask them what incentives you need to give them. So that at least to some extent they can compete with what is being imported. Secondly, there's also a procurement policy that you can use in line with all these executive orders by presidential executive orders by the government. Use your procurement policy. You do a lot of rural electrification, this and that, all over the place by government. You can patronize those locals to encourage them, not to go and block importation and make the prices expensive. So we have to do a lot of subsidizing renewable, because it's not in all cases that subsidy is bad. But there are some subsidy programs that are really necessary.
But how do you subsidize that? Is it by removing duties and taxes? Or?
Remove first the VAT, remove the duty. That will go a long way. It's also a form of subsidy. Financing for the renewable, you can provide concessionary financing for it. By installing a renewable system, you get cheaper funding. These are the kind of things, and even abroad, that is what is done. In the light or within the context of this climate change thing that many countries are pursuing. You should make it more easy. It should be much more easier, for citizens. Whether you are low-income people, you should be able to put some solar. I mean, how much energy do they consume anyway?
Correct.
They just need the light for fan, for lighting, maybe one fridge. That's all. So if with 100,000 you can do that, or even 50,000, fine. So that is one way to go to solve part of the things we can do, low-hanging fruits, to address this energy issue.
Deficiency.
While the government continues, because while I was on my way here, I was reading that the Gencos, Association of Gencos, said very soon there will be complete shutdown because the government was
they are being owed
4 trillion naira.
Wow.
Yes, I was shocked. 4 trillion.
Yeah. You know.
So that's a major issue. How do we deal with that? Because you can't offload that to the citizens that are complaining already that
and they're not even getting power.
Yes.
And then you recently just adjusted prices upwards. So
adjusted prices. So these are major developmental
how do you
issues.
think that industry unravels? Do you think that the problem they have now is a problem that the government can fix? Or do you think maybe perhaps it probably needs to start from the scratch again, the way we did telecoms? How does the government fix this? I mean, if you were to use advice,
it is a very challenging issue. Yeah. But first, we must admit, there are different layers. It's a chain.
Yeah.
There's the Genco and there's the transmission, there's the distribution.
Yeah.
Now, the distribution, I think we got it wrong from the beginning because of the quality of the investors, in terms of technical capacity, in terms of financial capacity, and the way the whole thing was done. And some people, I think, had a wrong understanding, wrong expectation of the kind of money that they thought they could make from this electricity provision thing. And of course, many of them burnt their fingers. So if you look at currently, I think only very few of them are really,
carrying the entire
yes, are carrying on. Many of them, the licenses have been revoked and all of that. So the quality of the investors initially was an issue. Many of them could not come on board with the right kind of equity. Many of them borrowed money from the banks. Interest rate was running. There was the tariff issue was there. So at the end,
cost-reflective tariffs.
Yes.
Yeah.
So first, there is quality of investors. Secondly, the tariff. You can't run away from tariff.
Yeah.
Certainly.
The tariff was not good.
Yeah, the tariff was not good. So we need to also do something about the tariff. But you cannot fix a tariff that will be completely cost-reflective. So the government has to come on board. Now we have this end bet where the government is putting some money, but we need to restructure the whole thing, reset it, and define the boundaries. How far can the government go, and how far should the consumers also go? We have to have a middle point. I think that is the way, because what is on ground now is not sustainable. And some of this billing too, I think there has to be proper checking. Because when Gencos just come and say that you are owing us 4 trillion.
How did they come up with that? I don't want this, because if we start to talk about power now, I mean, I have a stake in power as well. So we're not going to end. But still on this theme, right? The Buhari government tried to intervene in a lot of sectors through a lot of all these development economics or development finance initiatives that they did, or stimulus. So you saw, even in the power sector as well, they had different programs to support, whether it's metering or whether it's cement or whether it's infrastructure. And you saw that even in manufacturing, there was power intervention funds, there was intervention funds for manufacturing and SMEs. In hindsight, do you think those were good policies, or were they just policies that were good, but just perhaps hijacked by inefficiencies or corruption? I mean, because now we're seeing the current CBN say, you know what, we're not going to be doing any of these things. We're not doing, unorthodoxy. We're not going to be intervening in this form. We're just going to stick to our ambit, which is, price stability and currency stability as well. Even though development finance is part of the CBN's job, but they also don't want to, expand that. What do you think went wrong the last time, and how can government now, perhaps come in the way that you earlier described?
You see, the intervention funds were not bad in themselves, because I know of manufacturers who said to me at that time I was at the Lagos Chamber that if not for those intervention funds, it would have been very difficult for them to sustain their businesses. Some of them were also able to use the intervention funds, to be able to refinance some other facilities that they had taken at very high rates. So it's provided a breather for many of them. And again, to come back to the issue of government intervention, this is a developing economy. There are issues of market failure. And market failure in the sense that for the mainstream financial system, I'm talking of the commercial banks, lending to the real sector is not attractive because the risk is very high. So to get them to lend to agriculture, to get them to lend to manufacturing and all of that was a major challenge. Apart from the high-end manufacturers, many other SMEs, and that is why the kind of collateral they demand from you are sometimes almost impossible. Most times, some of them ask for collateral that is as high as 300% of the value of the facility.
Wow.
So that they are fully covered. Even the development finance institutions, they also went that route. Most times they ask for bank guarantees.
But wasn't this because their own fingers were burnt too? Because we also had manufacturers couldn't repay some of those loans.
But again, it depends. Because you can't be a financial system that don't want to take any risk. Entrepreneurship is about risk-taking. So when you say you are supporting entrepreneurs and you don't want to take any risk, then where is your development role? That is why development finance institutions should also have some exposure in terms of risk. Because the entrepreneurs they are supporting are also taking risk. There's no guarantee. But what we can, watch out for is insider abuses and all of that takes place within the financial system. But to walk away completely from not wanting to take any risk, I think is completely a contradiction within the framework of development finance system. Because you are supporting a system. I mean, if you need to have some guarantees, so be it. To be credit guarantee, whatever guarantees. But to say that you don't want to take any risk at all, then you are not supporting entrepreneurs. Because nothing is sure as an entrepreneur.
So if this government decides to listen to you now, say, okay, you know what, we will intervene. We've seen a number of programs, particularly credit related, but more geared towards consumer credit. But if the government were to support any sector, which sort of segues into my next question, because I've always wondered from a manufacturing perspective, everybody talks about industrialization and industrialization. I mean, how do we industrialize? And if we were to industrialize, where's the low-hanging fruit that you say, okay, you know what, if the government pursues this area, it's the low-hanging fruit. So for example, economics would always say, focus on where you have competitive advantage. So some will say, okay, look, should Nigeria focus on textiles or should Nigeria focus on agriculture, which the Buhari government did focus on a lot. Should we focus on energy? Should we focus on education? Should we focus on steel? So what sectors, because the government can be everywhere, so what sectors do you think, look, this is where we probably should support from a government perspective because you think that that's where we have competitive advantage?
Now, first, we need to deal with some cross-cutting issues as far as government intervention is concerned. And that is infrastructure financing. That is very basic for all operators in the economy, whether you are in services, whether you are in production. So we need to see a lot more resources going into financing infrastructure. I mean, that is what is making China what it is today. As an investor, whether you are in services, you don't have to be worrying about infrastructure-related issues. So that should be basic to ensure competitiveness of every sector. Whether you are talking about energy or you are talking about logistics. Those two are very, very critical. And even financing. Those things are very, very critical. Secondly, in terms of industrialization, what is most attractive to me as far as pursuing the industrialization agenda is concerned is to focus on what you call resource-based industrialization. Let your resources determine your priorities. You know,
when you say resources, you mean natural resources, human resources, or
natural resources, human resources.
Okay.
Anything that can bring significant value to the industrialization process. That is where to go. I mean, take our oil and gas, for instance. We have fantastic advantage in oil and gas. And there's no reason why we should be having issues with anything that has to do with oil and gas. You know? And that should be a sector that can even drive like a locomotive, drive other sectors. If you had paid the right kind of attention to it. Because we have very good leverage, but we have mismanaged it over the decades. That is part of the reason we are where we are now. Because when you compare us with some of all these UAE, Norway, and all of that, you can see that we are
they've actually used that to industrialize.
Yes, that is very key. The second point is about what I call some core industries. You know, you have heavy industries, you have the light industries. The core industries deserve support because it is they that will support the light industries. For instance, take the plastic industry, plastic manufacturing industry. You know, you use a lot of plastic for packaging across practically all sectors. But the main raw material is coming from the petrochemicals. So imagine you have a robust petrochemical industry. It makes it life easy for those who are in plastics. You know? The same thing with even the aluminum smelter. Cables and all these aluminum products. If you have a very good aluminum smelter industry, which was the vision of some past administration, although at some point we abandoned it. This thing that is in Akwa Ibom, this aluminum smelter industry, that is the vision because the major raw material for that is gas.
It's gas, which is situated there in the Nigeria.
This is also situated there. So the model was fantastic. And once you have that, apart from the export revenue it will generate, it will support the cable industry, the wire industry, and all of that. So it also has an import substitution effect. The same thing with all these our paper mills. We have forests, we have everything here. We had the paper mill, there was one manner of privatization that was done. Those paper mills went on that. We have the Okuiboku, we have the Jeba paper mill, we have the Wokpe paper mill. This is supposed to support our packaging sector. Cartons, envelopes, all those things. You know? So those key industries, because the more you are import dependent, the weaker your industrialization is. So supporting those key core industries, the same thing with iron and steel. Now we are talking about automobile industry, assembling vehicles. Now, you import practically everything, including even the tires.
Even the tires are using it for the...
Yeah, you are using for then you say you have made a Nigerian vehicle. I mean, that is an illusion. That is why it's as expensive as even the vehicles that are imported. So what is the advantage? So you need those core industries to support our industrialization. So I think that should be the sequence of it so that we can have an industrialization system that is sustainable, that will make our industries more competitive, that will also facilitate import substitution. So that way, I think that is the way to go.
All right, great response. So let's segue into AFCFTA. A lot has been said about it over the years. I think just recently Nigeria signed up to, I think the federal government also gazetted the ECOWAS tariffs, uniform tariff, which is important for actualization of the AFCFTA. But just curious to know whether local manufacturers, which I mean, you did mention that we're seeing a lot of increase in exports within Africa. Are local manufacturers taking advantage of AFCFTA in any way, or is it that maybe it just hasn't started yet, for them?
Well, first of all, when we talk about this international trade, there is trade in goods that is trading services. Now, in the Nigerian economy, we have better advantage for now in the services sector than in the goods production sector. Again, because of some of the problems we have discussed earlier. Cost of production is extremely high. Cost of financing, 30%. I don't know how anybody can produce competitively at that kind of cost of financing. So that makes it extremely difficult. I'm not saying that you cannot achieve more, but when you have countries like Morocco, like South Africa, even Botswana, Egypt, and all of that.
That are borrowing at single digits.
Borrowing at single digit, then even better infrastructure. And you now have this common market. Our manufacturers will struggle to be able to compete with those ones, except possibly maybe in some agro-allied areas where we may have some advantage because of the local raw materials and so on. But when it comes to core manufacturing, it's going to be extremely challenging. So we need to struggle about it. And that is why the Manufacturers Association at the beginning kicked against this AFCAT. That is why we delayed our signing endorsement of it. You know, unfortunately, the problems they were expressing concern about at that time, those problems are still here. Because right now it will be cheaper for you to produce a vehicle maybe in South Africa or in Morocco and bring it here.
But isn't this part of the so-called market reforms that the CBN is doing? I mean, is it not all part of trying to, stabilize FX and trying to go into, orthodox monetary policy reforms to drop inflation? Isn't that why we're having high interest rates? I mean, don't manufacturers understand this?
No. I mean, CRR of 50%. Go and check the literature. There is no country where you have a cash reserve ratio of 50%. No country. No country is even anywhere near that.
Very, very punitive.
It's punitive. It almost destroys the whole concept of financial intermediation.
But I thought the CBN's reason is because, they're trying to control money supply.
No. I think we need to go back to the drawing board as far as that is concerned. Because if we are tackling inflation...
impact the forex reforms that you so like?
No. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's strangulating the financial system. If we have issues with money supply, I think we should look at the sources of those monies. That is why even the CBN governor persistently have been talking about a very good handshake between the monetary and the fiscal authorities. If the tap is running from the fiscal side, let us see how we can regulate that, whichever way we want to do it. Because the more you resort to this orthodoxy, the more you make life difficult for those who are in business. Some people took facility at 18%. Now they are paying 30%. How do you want the business to survive? And yet you say you want investment, you want to create jobs. Many businesses have gone under. Some of them have ended up with AMCON because of the very hostile environment. But how do you deal with that? And you come and deal with the issue of diesel, you deal with the issue of the ports and all of that. So it makes more sense to just gather your capital, go and buy treasury bills or buy government bonds. You wake up and go and play.
How does the CBN reduce interest rates in this kind of environment? How would it do it?
The issue is about inflation target.
Yes.
Let us identify what are the key drivers of inflation.
We all know
it's not only money supply.
It's structural. So it wasn't that why the previous government was trying to address it by doing development finance and trying to...
That is why I will not dismiss it completely. Because some of the industry that has turned into, even including these investors in refineries. Yes, Emefiele may have his own issues, but he was very passionate about domestic production. There was a lot of abuse, no doubt.
Yeah.
But he was he was visiting the refinery almost every month to check the progress, to do all sorts of things, He was very passionate about it, even though they messed up a lot of things in the process. But we cannot completely write off some of those intervention things that he did. It is to fill that gap, which are again called market failure in the financial market. Those things are key, but we need to address structural issues. We need to address tariff issues. Because some of those who are producing, you'll be amazed at the amount of tariff import duty that they are paying. This is feed into cost. Look at all our public, all this Danfo and all this. Look at how rickety they are. You know, and sometimes I feel embarrassed as a Nigerian when you see how they pack our own citizens.
And then put them in
a very rickety vehicle.
Yeah.
And the point is that the cost import duty of importing those things are
Just
too high.
Interesting. So, I mean, we're almost at the end of the show. It's been such an engaging discussion. I want us to close with the Nigerian youth. We've seen a lot of them on social media crying and groaning and complaining, about these reforms. There is really nothing you can tell them about the reforms that they will buy because, they feel it in a different way from a lot of us. And they can't understand why reforms should be this painful. But the young people are, they own the future, right? And so as somebody who's done manufacturing for years, or been in this space for years, we see a lot of young Nigerians now gravitate more into content creation on social media or probably working for, companies abroad or perhaps even jack buying as we tend to say now. From a manufacturing point of view, what can young people do? Is there any hope for them? Can they maybe, because Dangote was the youth when he started. A lot of the manufacturers today were young people when they started. So what's the opportunity for young people in manufacturing now? Are there any that you see?
Well, it is tough. But first, let me say generally that Nigeria is a very huge market. So the market itself is a huge opportunity. It's a huge consumer market, perhaps the biggest in Africa. So that is an opportunity. The challenge with production is how do you now produce in a way that will be competitive? Because you are also in an economy where all manner of things are coming from outside the country, especially from Asia, China, and all of that. So you come back to the challenge of competitiveness of production. And for those of them that have ideas of what to produce, how can it be competitive? Because you have to worry about generator, you have to worry about the cost of financing, you have to worry about the cost of distribution of the products. And sometimes you have to even worry about the purchasing power of the people. So it's a very difficult terrain, I must tell you, for the young people. The easier terrain for the young people are in the services sector. Areas that are talent related, areas that are skill based, because in those areas, your infrastructure requirement is not that heavy, and you can easily, if you have the skill, you can easily, find your way around. Because just as I said, it's a very huge market. A lot of them are doing well in the creative space, in the entertainment sector.
But wouldn't that just change the coloration of this economy? That means that, in the next 20, 25 years, we're not going to have manufacturing capacity. The young people are not getting there now. Isn't that a challenge?
You are beginning to sound like Trump now. The issue is about, we need to also be careful about fixation about manufacturing. I've mentioned that manufacturing should be based on competitive advantage.
Okay.
I've talked about resource-based industrialization. So there are tracks you will be in manufacturing that it will be easy for you to move on. But generally, what is important in any economy is your capacity to create value, whichever way you create it. As long as value is generating money for you, you are good to go. If you are not getting it locally, you will get it elsewhere. If a comedian stands in front of an audience, he's not producing anything. The value is that he makes people laugh. And some of them are making very good money from that.
So value for young people in Nigeria now is probably not in manufacturing, but in services.
Services, they have greater advantage in services because the constraints, the hurdles in services are much less than the hurdles in production. But for those of them who have, maybe parents or uncles or relations that have some deep pockets, they can support you with generator, the space and all of that, the vehicles for logistics, if you get the product right. But manufacturing is actually much more challenging. But
Today.
if the government can create the environment, I mean, for instance, you create industrial parks or you create a park, even for those in agriculture, why not? Agriculture is another big area. But if you make it tech-driven, young people will go there.
Perhaps that's why you see a lot of young people in tech, because the funding is available for them for tech than in manufacturing.
Than in manufacturing. I mean, if the government is also able to do a lot more, I think the government is trying to do something in the area of agriculture to make it, package it in a way that will be attractive to the young people. Because it's a huge opportunity. I mean, to feed over 200 million people.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a big market. You know?
All right, finally, sir. I mean, I agree. Still on this point of young people and the examples that you made of what they can do. I mean, are there examples that you can cite where, perhaps maybe government has also aided that? Any recent ones?
Well, I cite the example of the Muri Okunla Park. Okay. Now, it was under Fashola.
Yeah.
That place was like a mechanic environment,
mechanic village, yes,
broken down vehicles, some, miscreants sometimes even hang around there. And there was this beautification program by Fashola, and he decided to beautify that place, removed all those mechanics, beautify the park. And guess what? A whole lot of ideas were coming from young people on how to make better use
of that place.
Of that place. So we now began to see exhibitions. Some people are holding wedding receptions there. A lot of entertainment were going on there. So it's amazing how ideas can be generated once you create an environment. At the time Fashola was putting up the park, he wasn't thinking of making the place an exhibition hub or entertainment environment and all of that. But people saw it and they came up with the idea. So that speaks to the creativity, the innovation that young people have. Once you create the right kind of environment, they will create value from such an environment that you never even imagined. So creating the environment is extremely critical to supporting young people. You don't have to give them the ideas. They will come with the ideas. Forget about ideas. Forget about telling them what to do. Just make the environment easy.
You're really right, because I remember that park was such a dungeon back then.
Yes.
Yeah, so perhaps probably led to most of the other roundabouts that we're seeing around Lagos that is now almost like a tourist a bit of a tourist attraction. There's this one at Ajose Adogun as well. And not just in Lagos, in other states as well.
That is the way it is going now. I mean, during public holidays, I mean, you see people, there's one at Alausa there, for every public or every festivities, people go with their families and all of that. And this is how to make people feel that they are also living. In spite of all the challenges, at least they go there, they feel okay. The same thing in Abuja, So those things are some of the things that we need to do, and just create the environment for young people to be able to, bring in their innovation. And even this jackpot thing, it's also a window. If you develop people, equip them properly. I mean, you'll be amazed how much plumbers are getting in Canada.
In those places, and how much they can remit as well, because it does aid remittances.
Exactly. Yeah. Electricians, most of these countries, they need these artisans. And some of them are here just waiting away. They work for a whole day, maybe you give them 5,000 naira or something,
When they can make a lot more.
Yes, there was a time I think it was in Canada, they said they were short of trailer drivers. As a CEO, in Nigeria, where we have trailer drivers all over the place.
Trailer drivers who don't go to driving school, but they can drive trailers. All right, so inflation numbers are out for March. And according to the MBS, inflation number for the month of March was 24.23%, which is the first time that we've seen a hike in this period of rebasing. I think February was 23.18%. Is there any cause of concern for you? Not sure what the reason was, but why we saw inflation numbers, official reason. But any cause of concern or any reason why you think we're seeing things go back up?
Typically, what often happens, I haven't seen the full details, but one, possible source is food inflation. If for any reason we have a spike, either because of this problem of insecurity, which seems to be getting, getting worse of late, those things can be very disruptive from a food inflation perspective. The other possibility is the FX, but I must admit that we have seen some stability up until this Trump issue and the speculative pressure. We are beginning to see some slight depreciation in the exchange. Then, of course, issue of energy prices. Basically, I think those are the key main drivers, and that is where we can locate, possible pressure as far as the inflation.
What does this now mean for interest rates? I know, back talking about interest rate issues.
Well, it is too early, to.
You think the CBN would probably adjust? Would stick to the hawkish MPR?
No. I think we have pushed the instruments to the limit. I'm talking of the monetary policy instruments.
Yeah.
I spoke to 50% CRR. Where else do you want to go? Unless you want to take away the entire
MPR at 27 point.
MPR at 27.5. I mean, that is high enough.
But now that inflation is up, is this going to change?
No, this is not so significant, and we cannot establish a trend yet from this.
It's 3 months now.
In 3 months,
we've seen drops from January to February.
This is a spike. But let's see what happens the following month before we begin to say that we now have a trend. Because for me, I'm not a fan of further tightening of monetary policy. Because if businesses are borrowing at 30%, 35%, then what else do you want them to do? Unless you want to decouple the business environment from the financial system completely. I mean, it's bad enough the way it is. That is my own personal view. So at worst, maybe we just have a hold if you cannot, losing or, ease the monetary policy. So at least you should have a hold. But not to go on this tightening.
Tightening that we
Yes, no, certainly not.
3 minutes, because we're basically out of time. I just want us to touch on cross-border payments because there's a lot that we're seeing in Africa around cross-border payment, whether it's through PPSS, that's PAPS. We've seen a lot of companies also, play in that space. We've even seen crypto companies pay in the space because from what we hear, somebody manufactures something locally and then tries to, you can actually send it abroad within Africa, but receiving money is a problem. How are manufacturers solving that problem at the moment?
Well, I first of all, there is very limited exports in terms of, manufacturing exports. Many of our manufacturers are actually focused more on the domestic market. And that's why they also worry a lot about protectionist policies to protect them, But I think for most manufacturers, they still, use the conventional, traditional, going through the banking system, filling all sorts of things. Either they are wiring money abroad through letters of credit or getting payment through all manner. And because we have all these IMTOs now all over the place, which the government has licensed, a lot of funds are also coming through them, because the system has been liberalized. It's not as difficult as it used to be, And now there are all manner of apps. I don't know much of them, but a whole lot
that they use
that people use now to transfer money here and there, But I know that the IMTOs have been playing a very big role in this, and many of the manufacturers are also operating in the conventional, traditional mode of transfer of funds.
All right, guys, this has been another episode of Talknomics with Ugodre, and I've been here. I've had the pleasure of speaking to someone I deeply respect, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you so much, sir, for coming. I hope that you come again.
I will.
Discussion.
Very good.
All right, fantastic. Of course, guys, like, comment. I'd like to get your feedback as well. Is there anybody else you want me to interview on this show? Do let me know. We try as much as possible to get them here. Until we'll see you again next time, do have a profitable day ahead. Goodbye.